So, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Joan Casey, and I'm the founder and president of Educational Advocates College Consulting. We've been in practice for 20 years, and have worked with so many wonderful students and families during that time. And we're really pleased tonight to talk to you about summer and extracurricular activities. And I'm going to let Katie introduce herself.
Hi, my name's Katie Bacon. I'm also a college consultant and really happy to be talking with all of you tonight. Slide two.
Okay, so again, we're here how to help your teens shine through high school and summer experiences.
So what we're going to talk about today, why do extracurricular activities? So obviously they're important in terms of college, but I would argue they're more important in terms of a student's self-discovery of who they are and what activities they like to do. We're going to talk about crafting an extracurricular profile in terms of where students want to go and what they want to study. We're going to talk about what most colleges seek when it comes to activities, the pitfalls of overcommitting and how to avoid burnout. As the academic work ramps up, junior, senior year, students may feel the need to focus on fewer activities. And we're going to do some case studies. So extracurriculars are important when applying to any college, but as we'll discuss for selective colleges, the type of activities you do especially matters. So next slide, please. So why do extracurriculars? First reason is that they help students feel more connected to school and thus more motivated to engage in academics and develop relationships with teachers and peers. Second, they help them understand themselves better and build confidence as they gain skills. They help students learn communication skills and how to work as part of a group, often building leadership skills over time. And maybe most importantly, they help them feel more connected to their greater community. Next slide, please. So there's a really wide range of activities that students can do at school, in their community, or independently. And I don't know how many of you have experience with a Common App, which your students will have to fill out when it comes time to apply to college. But part of it is an activity list where you have the chance to list up to 10 extracurricular activities that you've done. So this could be athletics, either at your school or club athletics. It could be being part of a club at school, school orchestra, being on the school newspaper. It could be volunteering in your community, working a part-time job, a summer internship, family responsibilities, a summer academic program. It could be an independent hobby that you pursue. We've had students who've done ceramics or fixed cars or done a podcast on something that they care about. So as students go further in school, you can limit your activities, but you want to make sure to show leadership, engagement, and initiative in all the activities that you pursue. Next slide, please. So what do colleges seek in terms of extracurriculars? Colleges have lots of different types of spots to fill on campus, and they want a vibrant community. So they look for evidence that an applicant will get involved on their campus if they're admitted. So it's a myth that colleges expect certain activities such as sports or volunteer work. Students should really pursue their interests. If they like what they're doing, their enthusiasm will be clear in their activities resume and in their school counselor recommendation. And their activities may even shape what they want to study in college. And again, competitive colleges are a little different. They seek more leadership and deeper involvement, and we'll provide examples in a few minutes. So note that these colleges will expect strength across the board in academics, rigor, recommendations, test scores, essays, and of course, extracurriculars. Uh,
Sorry, I jumped ahead on those slides.
oh, that's okay. So now it's
Um,
you, Joan.
all right. So the pitfalls of overcommitting. So sometimes the downside of this message that students hear, like, oh, let's take students that are very strong students and they anticipate, doing well in school. And then they hear this message that colleges really like to see leadership, initiative, engagement. And then they become so consumed by that message that they maybe start doing too much, or they, let their extracurricular activities overtake, and they're up till like 2 or 3 in the morning, doing their schoolwork because they were late at school doing activities. Now, that is not a good recipe for success. So, there needs to be balanced. And not every student, it's not right for every student to do too many activities because they might need downtime. They may need more time to study. So we just, we want to see students engage in their community or in their school at a level that's right for them. So, sometimes the downside is that students get so involved in activities and so busy, then their academic performance starts to slide. And, at the end of the day, what colleges care the most about is your grades and, challenging yourself as much as possible. Sometimes, this can have negative effects on sleep and mental health. They're just too busy, and that can also strain family relationships. I've had conversations, with parents and students that where they say like she loves everything she does, and but she's up too late, and we have to have that difficult conversation of like, well, something has to give, and need to do some reflection and figure out what needs to change. So that's going to help the student. At the end of the day, the student's health is the most important. And then, sometimes students start in an activity because they really love it. I can think of students over the years who have done things like figure skating at a very high level or gymnastics, and then have had injuries, or just that commitment of being up at like 5 in the morning or even earlier and driving long ways. It gets to them after a while. And so the family has to rethink and, decide, is that going to continue? So, one student I can think of entered high school, and she really wanted to get involved in the high school and make friends there. So she gave up some of those outside activities. Of course, other students will stay committed, and that's fine too. So, but just the balance is really, really important. So how do you avoid this trap of the burnout? So one thing is quality over quantity. There's doing things that are meaningful to you, the student, things that really matter. Like Katie said on the Common App, you have 10 spots to fill in activities, but there's no colleges don't think less of students who don't fill in 10 spots. So if you have a few things that you do in a really meaningful way and you're very engaged and it's made an impact, then that's fantastic. So and then we'll go over this again in a little later, but like early in high school you want to do a broader breadth of activities. You don't have as big a homework load in many cases. You have more time to explore. You're not really sure what you like yet. That's the time to really cast a wide net. And then later, as you go up in the years, like narrowing that scopes to those things that you truly care about. And I think it's important, as parents. So, we all are guilty of this as parents. Like, if your child is like lying on the couch twiddling their thumbs, to be like, "Don't you have homework?" Or "It's a nice day. Why don't you go out?" Or that sort of thing. But kids are so structured these days that they sometimes do need that downtime. They do need time to just hang out with their friends, to take up a hobby, whether that be knitting or, jogging, not necessarily for their school team, but just for fun, or, just being kids. So, if, as Katie said earlier, if they're doing activities, formal activities that they really love, then that will shine in their college application. But they should never choose activities just for the sake of it looks good on the resume, because it won't come through as genuine. It won't come through as something they're really excited about, and it will be a waste of their time if they're not engaged. Okay, so crafting an extracurricular profile. So entering ninth grade summer, I think the most important message about entering freshman year is really students should do whatever they want. They're still kids. A lot of them may have already been going to a camp, and they may want to go back to that camp, or maybe they want to do some kind of general interest summer camp near their home, or take take some fun art classes in the community or a writing program or volunteer, spend time in the outdoors, help around the house, babysit. Like it honestly really doesn't matter. I think that that's the time for them to, just kind of be kids still. And then, when you move into ninth grade, the school year, so this is like, your transition into high school, depending on where they go to high school, maybe they're entering a new school, maybe they're in a town where there are many middle schools feeding into the high school, so they're around a lot of new people. You know, friendships can shift and change, and students who make the most successful transition into high school are those who get involved in some kind of activity. And, if they don't like the first thing they do, they can do something else. So that's the beauty of this. And since probably a good percentage of you have kids that are already in high school, that most schools have a club fair. They do that every year. So there's all lots of different ways for students to get involved. Even if they don't see themselves as athletic, there's usually some kind of sport you can do. I know one of my seniors this year didn't see herself as athletic at all, but she loved the idea of a team. So she tried out for ultimate frisbee, and she said she couldn't even throw the frisbee at first, and it would fall in the wrong direction. But she eventually learned and made a great group of friends. So, but it doesn't have to be sports. It can be anything, and it also doesn't have to be at school. You can. For whatever reason, some students just don't find their niche at the school, or maybe they attend a school that doesn't have a lot of extracurricular activities. So doing things in the community is wonderful. It's just as meaningful. So entering 10th grade summer, this is when the student can kind of pick it up a little bit. They have 1 year of high school under their belt. Maybe maybe they took a, computer science class or some kind of computer class freshman year. Maybe they want to learn more about coding or artificial intelligence, or, they've really gotten into the jazz band or at school and they want to do some kind of music program, or they're great at their sport and they want to go to some camps and, work on their skills, so things like that. It's also a great time, like if a student, it's very early to develop career interests, but sometimes you have students that like, oh, I want to be a nurse, or I think, engineering would interest me, or that kind of thing. And that can be a great summer to job shadow. Of course, that doesn't take up the whole summer, but, volunteering, interviewing people that are in different careers, which is something we have our clients do from time to time when they are trying to figure things out. Or starting some kind of, project, like whether that's, we've had students start businesses. During COVID, one of our clients, he noticed that young families in the neighborhood were working from home, but they didn't have anywhere to send their kids. So he started like a little camp that he did just in the neighborhood, and parents paid him, and it was really very successful. I know another student that loves computers who would make up websites, and he would get the name, so it would be like ice cream for icecream.com, and then he would design like an ice cream website, and he would sell those to like entrepreneurs that were starting an ice cream business. So students can be clever and do all kinds of different things. So 10th grade, crafting an extracurricular profile. So now we're in 10th grade. And, this is a good time, like if a student has been involved in a club, to take on like some kind of a leadership role in the club, like maybe, becoming the secretary, the treasurer. Um, I think being like adding value. So whether you're in Model UN or Math League or on the school paper, like saying like, how can I add value, and not just sort of show up, but like, start to cultivate um, those leadership skills, so that you will be maybe recognized as a leader, in leading that organization or club in some way by the time you're a senior. So yeah, students can continue volunteering, but so just like the idea of taking on more responsibility.
And this is the summer before 11th grade. So, now you want to have narrowed down your interest a bit so you can keep on exploring some that are important to you. So for instance, if you're really interested in biology, you might want to try to intern in a lab during the summer. This is also summer when many students are 16, so it's the first time that they can work, and a lot of students need to make money. But whatever job you have, you can use it to develop skills like teamwork and multitasking, and those are going to help you in high school, college, and beyond. This could also be a good summer to apply to a selective program like the Telluride Summer Seminar, where you have to show some initiative and leadership skills to get accepted. You could also show initiative by doing your own independent project. A former student of mine tested water quality in various water sources around Boston, including after rainstorms. And you can try to get involved in a community initiative that's important to you. Another student who's really interested in music, she volunteered to book bands for a community festival in her town. So once you're in 11th grade, again, you can think about any activities that have a potential where you have a potential to have a leadership role. So you might want to express to the adult in charge your interest in such a role and get advice on how to reach that goal. So if you want to be a sports captain, begin showing leadership by mentoring younger members of the team, teaching skills to teammates, helping the coach with practices. And also, try to figure out what you're most interested in academically and see if you can pursue that outside of the classroom. So if you love math, try tutoring some students. Or if you're interested in computer science, you could try developing an app outside of class. Um, and junior year is also a time to see how far you can go in terms of your interests. So a student I worked with did a documentary on the Norwegian resistance during World War II, and she ended up going to the semifinals of the state history competition. So the summer before 12th grade, again, each summer is kind of a narrowing. But I would say that during this summer, think carefully about your interests and how you might be able to start to apply them in the real world. So some examples are an aspiring engineer joining with like-minded peers to construct a greenhouse for the local food pantry. Or an aspiring scientist who's worked in a lab the previous 2 summers, developing their own research project with a mentor or assisting an established researcher with their work. So again, like taking on, more initiative each summer. So senior fall, students are going to be really busy applying to colleges, trying to do as well as they can academically. So you do want to stay involved in extracurriculars, but you want to be a bit choosy about the ones that you focus on. So I would say, pick the ones that you enjoy the most and that have the most impact and kind of find where those intersect. Um, Hopefully you'll have leadership roles, maybe team captain or editor of the newspaper or club president. You could also lead an initiative that's important to you, either inside or outside of school. So I know a student who wants to major in astrophysics, and he led an initiative in his town for the whole town to turn off ambient light, and then they all gathered in a park to see the stars. So, tied in with what he wanted to study. Um, you could work at a part-time job, again, both to make money and to show the ability to work hard at several things at once. Colleges really value that. Um, but most of all, whatever you're working on, show commitment to that endeavor.
We're going to go over 4 case studies, and there are two moderately selective schools, and then 2 very highly selective schools. And so I think that it's important before we go into these case studies to go over a few things. One is the vast majority of students are just students that are like involved in clubs. They're not necessarily in leadership roles. They're not necessarily doing the kinds of things that we've been giving examples through this presentation. And they get into plenty of wonderful colleges. They're just involved, they're engaged. And that, students are who they are. And that's wonderful because colleges want to admit students who are engaged. So you'll see, a difference in the kinds of activities between the moderately selective and the highly selective schools. So we have first we're going to do Fordham and then Stanford, and then Katie's going to discuss University of Vermont and Brown. And these are former clients, so these are actual students that we work with. So just so you get a sense of the level of activities. So first we have a student that is currently at Fordham majoring in business. And he was in line with the academic profile and the standardized test profile for Fordham. And then in high school, he was very, very involved and engaged. So he, played three sports. He was on the yearbook. He took photos for the yearbook. He was a volunteer in a church, a food kitchen. He did that for almost his whole high school all his high school years. He worked a lot, so I think, he really showed a lot of work ethic and responsibility, like a food runner in a restaurant, a dishwasher, a fry cook. He took on many roles, and he actually, learned a lot about like what it's like to run a business because he knew the owners of the restaurant really well. And I think that was something he was able to talk about in his applications. He was also a school sports photographer. So, this leads to strong communication skills, obviously, working with people in need of food. He developed compassionate skills, getting to know those people over the years. And he also had, a creative streak, through his photography. So I would say this is what the vast majority of students would have a profile along these lines. Like they're not necessarily the captain, they're not necessarily the editor of the yearbook, but they're great, solid contributors, and they're students that colleges absolutely want to have on their campus. So we also want to help you understand, like, just because a student has like really great grades, a rigorous curriculum, and top standardized test scores, that colleges, the most selective colleges that admit like less than 10, less than 5%, or even some of the ones that admit like around 20%, they can fill their classes with students with great grades and rigorous classes. So how do they differentiate? So the way they do is the students, they're trying to create a class. So when they look at applications, they want to bring in people who are interesting in different ways. So, you always hear that sort of trope about like, oh, if they need a player and you play cello, that will help. And that's true. But, in general, they're just looking for students that they see as being future leaders, because that's what these schools like Stanford and Brown, like they don't view themselves as educating students, they see themselves as educating future leaders in our world. And so they're looking for evidence of that level of leadership, and that, it's fine if that's not who you are or who your child is, because there's going to be plenty. If they're good students, there's going to be plenty of great options for them. But just to give you a sense from this applicant, this was a very self-driven student. We have on the left activities. So there's sort of the, typical activities that a lot of kids would do: play on the tennis team, be in the student council, volunteer at a nonprofit, be on the debate, in the student, got rid of that as he went up in the years because realized other things were more important. But if you look in the middle in the leadership, you see that he had very high level activities, and these weren't orchestrated. This is just sort of who this person is. So, he designed an app that got a national recognition as App of the Year. He had won a state competition for a new business idea. He was named an emerging leader. He was from the Midwest. He also was very intrigued by artificial intelligence fairly early on, and he just like read about it and looked it up and was trying to do things on his own. And he stumbled on his own as a sophomore in high school on a grad student at Stanford that was doing work that really excited him. So he wrote to him, and this grad student could tell, wow, this high school kid's pretty knowledgeable. And they had conversations, and this grad student took him on an assistant, and he did very meaningful work. In fact, he went with this grad student and did a presentation in the computer science department at Brown when he was a senior in high school. So he also worked for a Massachusetts company and did a paid summer research project where he was part of a group that was designing an AI tool for the Department of Defense. Most of us are just, hearing about ChatGPT 4 in the past year or so, but this was, 2 or 3 years ago. Um, he was on his state's governor council for like advisory for STEM education in his state school systems. And he led hackathons where like hundreds of people would go. So like these are pretty impressive things for anyone to do, never mind a high school kid. So you can see how this is maybe different. And again, this shouldn't be taken as like pressure. Like, we don't want you to feel stressed, like, oh my goodness, I have to go home and tell my kid to do all these things. This is not who every kid is, but with our role is just to help you see, what the difference is. Okay. Take it away, Katie.
Okay. So this student is more along the lines of the first case study who Joan did. So she applied early action to UVM and UMass Amherst. She knew she wanted to study animal science on the way to becoming a vet. She got into both schools and then chose UVM. Um, and so her extracurriculars, she pursued several activities just because she enjoyed them. She took violin lessons, pottery classes, lessons through a dance studio. She gained some leadership skills by teaching dance classes to young dancers and working as an aide in the after-school program at her high school. She took a summer course exploring being a veterinary tech to see if animal science was indeed the major that she wanted to choose in college, and then potentially to become a veterinarian. And then she pursued this interest further by volunteering all last year at a golden retriever rescue organization. So, she was pretty target, some of the things she was just doing because she loved them. And some of the things she loved them and they were a little more targeted to kind of help her figure out if this is her path. Um, and then next slide, please. And then the next person is more along the lines of the Stanford student. It's a student who applied and got in early decision to Brown, and he, very self-motivated, very self-directed, and he really had a deep interest in a topic since childhood that he kind of followed on this path. And his main extracurricular here is independent weather forecaster. And this grew out of his love of snow and desire to understand and predict winter snowstorms. So he now builds forecasts and broadcasts them on X or Twitter and has 900 followers. And a lot of his extracurricular interests tie into or have grown from his interest in weather and data patterns. So he doesn't want to study weather forecasting in college, but he does want to study data science, and he has been able to show that connection. He was able to show that connection in his application. So some other things he did kind of at a higher leadership level. He was a data analytics intern at Northeastern, where he analyzed huge amounts of weather data and compared it to social science data on people's moods. And he was listed as an author on a paper that grew from this work. He also created and monitored a weather station at his high school. And then he takes pretty amazing photographs of clouds, and he learn to use them to help predict the weather. And then he created an art portfolio of those photographs. And in general, he's very involved at his school and in his community in terms of sports and activities, like leading tour guiding and leading community service initiatives. So some of the activities in this chart are typical high school activities. And then the ones in the leadership column show, as we've discussed, a higher level of leadership and engagement. But I think the main thing to understand about this student and also about the Stanford student is that all these extracurriculars grew from his passions and things that he loves doing or that are important to him. He's not doing them because he feels he should, but because he's genuinely interested in them.
So now would be a great time to put your questions in the Q&A, and we will, take your time putting them in. And if anyone wants to talk, we can also let you talk. And while you're doing that, I just want to thank you so much for coming. And I hope you learned something and that was useful, and that will be useful as you guide your children. This is just one part of the kind of work we do when we're working with high school students in helping them craft extracurricular profile, and, talking to students as they go through their years, and helping them come up with things that they think would interest them. We also, of course, advise students and families about the entire college process, including paying for college and all the steps and educating about what kinds of things can do in college in 2025. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can take a photo of the slide, and you have both my email address and Katie's, as well as our Calendly links if you wanted to set up an intro appointment. You can also scan the barcode and set up an appointment. I think that will go to me. So yeah, so let me stop sharing so we can get access to the questions. All right, so we have, for these highly selective schools, can you speak to the GPAs and test scores of the student? How do these work together with the extracurricular activities? Okay. Um, so, um, so those two students basically had like pretty much all A's and, very, very high standardized test scores. They had, very rigorous, like very high math and very high, like lots of AP classes. So they probably wouldn't be seriously considered at those schools if they didn't have those grades. They both were applied when it was still test optional, but both submitted test scores. And now those schools have gone back to requiring testing anyway. So I think the extracurricular activities gave them the edge because they were no longer just smart kids; they were future leaders, and that's again what those schools are looking for. Um, Okay, so and if I didn't answer that adequately, feel free to put another question in, or, if anyone wants to speak live, you can put that in the Q&A and we can turn on, allow you to speak. So somebody else asked how to help a neurodiverse child to engage in narrow focus. Again, if we were working with a neurodiverse child, we would get to know them, understand them, because of course, no one neurodiverse child is like another, right? Everybody would be very different. Some neurodiverse children really love narrowing in and, focusing in on something really specific. And, the idea of like going deep with one thing is really attractive to them, and they might be open and receptive to ideas. So it's a little hard to answer that question because I don't 100% know what you had in mind, but I think the key is, helping people getting to know a student, helping them prioritize, if they're too busy, not busy enough, helping them find things that they'll feel excited about and engaged with. And if it's only one thing, that's fine. Katie, do you have anything you want to add to either of those?
No, I don't think so. I could take the next one, which you've touched on, but how is SAT score important for college
Yeah,
application?
go for it.
Yeah. So I would say for this, it depends on the schools. Most schools are still test optional, and I think will remain test optional, but there's kind of a trickle of schools each year, has gone back to requiring tests. So, Brown, and it's these very selective schools, but Brown, Stanford, Cornell, Harvard, Georgetown, there are more too. So for those schools, it's obviously part of, it's one of the factors that the admissions committee is considering. But the most important factor is always going to be how the students do in their classes and the rigor of their classes. And then for the schools that are test optional, um, I think we don't know exactly how the different schools consider it when a student doesn't submit a score. But a lot of them say that they just, instead of looking at 5 variables, they look at 4 variables. So so it's definitely not the most important thing. But it has some weight in differentiating students.
Yeah, it's tricky because all the schools are different. We actually have a different presentation we do where we get a lot more into testing, but I would just say, your child is who they are. Um, they probably these days should sit for a test and do some preparation. Once in a while, a student, will hear, I took a practice test and there's no way I'm going to get up to a level that's equivalent to my grade. So this would be I had a student like this a couple of years ago who was an excellent student. She worked very hard. She had good grades. She was in, pretty rigorous courses, but she took the practice test. She wouldn't even tell me what it was. And she was just like, I can practice and do like a whole test prep thing, and I won't even get near the bottom of the 25th percentile of the school. And so, she just made a decision she was going to apply test optional. Other students, they maybe aren't the strongest test takers, but when they do a practice test and you've created a college list and you look at the middle 50% of scores, and you can see, okay, they're not that far off of the middle 50. So in this student's case, like, they don't have to have a 700. That's not the schools they're looking at, but they could be in range. And I think if you can get a score, it can help you. Like if you're in the middle 50% for the school, that can be helpful. Sometimes the more selective schools, like it's ideal to be in the 50th percentile versus the middle 50. And there's no question that some schools care about scores. They care a lot. So, you can look at the data. There's something called the common data set, and you can look at the percent of students that submitted SAT and ACT. And if a high percent of students submitted at a school that's test optional, you can kind of infer that that means that school is forgiving, a little bit more forgiving about tests. So if you're kind of in the ballpark for the middle 50, you should probably submit. And then other schools don't, they have a very, low percentage of submitters. And in those cases, you're better off going test optional if you're not in the middle 50. So again, unfortunately, colleges don't all do all things the same. They're all different, and that's, why it's complex, and they're not always transparent with families about it. So yeah, that's a whole other webinar we could do for you. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask while
I see a
we're
couple
together?
new ones,
Oh,
Joan.
okay. All
Yeah.
right, let's see here.
Can very high scores and great extracurriculars make up for a GPA that is not a 4.0, but high threes, taking the hardest classes? Or do both GPA and scores have to be top to begin with as table stakes for highly selective schools?
Okay. If you're if a student's high threes, depend, if a student has a 3.8 or 3.9, I mean, yeah, they should apply. They should try to apply to selective schools. Um, again, it- this isn't an exact science that these schools will do a holistic review. And again, a school that admits 25% might be fine with a 3.7, but a school that admits 5 or 10 might not be, so, but it's, students have a range. As long as students have a balanced college list, it's fine for them to, apply to a couple of places that are really hard to get into. I think that, students, if they're working with somebody like us, we can help shed some light. If they can look at the data that their high school publishes, they can talk to their school counselor, who, they've seen, the profiles of students. Where you worry is when students, like, let's say they want to apply early decision, which is the one where you apply and it's binding, and if you get in, you're committed to attend. The we don't like to see students, like, when we really don't think they have a very good chance of getting into that. We're not gonna tell them not to. It's their decision. But maybe they have a second school that they like almost as well, but it's a little bit of a reach too. And if they did that second school early decision, maybe they would have gotten in. But if they use their early on this sort of ultra reach, then they might end up not getting into either. So those are the kinds of strategic discussions we would have with students. So, um, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
All right.
So the next, I'll read it, but I can take the next one. But you might have something to add. So she said, did I understand correctly that most important is to show engagement, not necessarily leadership? Leadership is good, but if the child is not into that, engagement is okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say that engagement definitely is the most important thing. That it's really important for students to do extracurriculars for all the reasons we said, but just mainly to just figure out kind of who they are and what they like doing and what they potentially might like doing in college. So engagement is the most important thing. I think where the leadership comes in is in those, those like tougher schools where we showed you the case studies. I do think that, the Stanfords and Browns, they are looking for leadership because those are the type of students who they're looking to fill their class with. So I think it kind of depends on what college you're talking about.
Let's face it, most kids are not those kids we profiled with all those leadership activities. That's not who most high school students are. And most high school students are wonderful and they're going to become great adults and they're going to do great things in the world. But, we certainly don't want to stress them out. We want them to be excited about their life and engage, like Katie said. So, um, yeah, okay. They're all going to be, they're all going to do fine. I know that. So, any other questions before we wrap up? And you can, always, if you think of something after the meeting, you can always reach out to us by email. We'd love to talk to you again. So, well, I guess we will wrap it up then. Thank you so much for coming. We always enjoy presenting to parents and thank you. We have another webinar for I know there was at least one person on here who has a child who's neurodiverse, but we're doing a presentation March 12th. Our colleague Ildi is doing it with Dr. Joseph Moldova, who's a neuropsychologist, and they're going to be talking about transition to college and documentation and how to make sure that you have the correct documentation in place and answering questions related to that. So if that's of interest to any of you, or if you have friends that you think would be interested, be sure to share that information with them. So thank you so much.
Thank you so
And hope
much for
hope to
coming.
yeah, we'll hope to see you again.